The room goes quiet after he speaks, not because he raised his voice, not because he demanded attention, but because somewhere along the way, he stopped asking for permission to exist. Years earlier, he would have explained himself, smoothed over awkward moments, said yes when he wanted to say no. He believed respect came from being agreeable. Then life taught him something most men don't learn until after 40. People often value what you consistently protect, not what you constantly sacrifice. Age alone doesn't create wisdom. Experience does. Failed relationships, career disappointments, friendships that quietly faded. Moments when generosity was mistaken for weakness. Over time, these experiences reshape a man's standards, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. There are 7 things many men over 40 quietly stop tolerating, and with each one they let go, they often discover something unexpected. Respect begins to grow without forcing it. The first is constant disrespect disguised as humor. Many men spend years laughing along with comments that slowly chip away at their confidence. A sarcastic jab from a friend, a partner who dismisses every opinion with a joke, a coworker who always finds a way to make them the punchline. Behavioral psychology offers an important insight here. Repeated social interactions create expectations. When disrespect goes unchallenged, people unconsciously learn that the boundary doesn't exist. The pattern becomes the relationship. This doesn't mean reacting with anger over every careless remark. In fact, research on assertive communication consistently shows that calm, direct responses are more effective than emotional confrontations. Respect is rarely established by volume. It's established by consistency. The man over 40 begins to understand that silence isn't always maturity. Sometimes it's simply avoidance, wearing a respectable mask. So instead of laughing at every insult, he pauses. Sometimes he changes the subject. Sometimes he calmly says, "I don't find that funny." It's a small sentence, but psychologically, it changes the entire social contract. Because people don't simply observe what you tolerate. They build their expectations around it. For years, many men convince themselves that loyalty means carrying the entire weight of a relationship. They're always the first to call, the first to apologize, the first to make time. Eventually, they notice something unsettling. If they stop reaching out, the relationship quietly disappears. Sociologists call this reciprocity, the expectation that healthy relationships involve a balanced exchange of effort over time. The balance is never perfect, but when it consistently flows in only one direction, resentment slowly replaces affection. By his 40s, a man often realizes that constantly proving his value is exhausting. He begins investing in people who invest back, not because he's become less caring, but because he's learned that mutual respect grows where responsibility is shared. That shift can feel lonely at first. A smaller circle often follows. Yet what remains is usually more genuine than what was lost. The third thing he stops tolerating is living by someone else's definition of success. In his 20s, success is often borrowed. It comes from promotions, bigger homes, expensive watches, or the approval of people he barely knows. Social comparison makes those goals feel urgent, and modern psychology has shown how easily external validation can become addictive. Then something changes. He starts asking questions that never seemed important before. Do I actually want this life? Or have I simply been chasing a picture someone else painted? Many men discover that respect begins with self-respect, and self-respect is impossible when every major decision is made to impress an invisible audience. The man who knows exactly what matters to him becomes remarkably difficult to manipulate. Criticism loses much of its power because his identity is no longer built on constant approval. And that quiet independence sets the stage for something even more challenging: letting go of habits that don't just waste time, but quietly drain the energy that earns lasting respect. The fourth thing he stops tolerating is constant chaos. There was a time when every crisis demanded his attention. Someone else's emergency became his responsibility. Every argument had to be settled. Every conflict had to be solved. But years of experience reveal a difficult truth. Not every fire deserves your water. Stress research has consistently shown that chronic exposure to unnecessary conflict elevates cortisol, impairs judgment, and slowly erodes emotional resilience. A man who lives in perpetual reaction rarely has the clarity to lead his own life, so he becomes more selective. He no longer mistakes availability for kindness or exhaustion for commitment. He protects his peace with the same seriousness he once reserved for protecting his career. To outsiders, it can look like distance. In reality, it's discernment. The fifth thing he stops tolerating is the inability to say no. For many men, yes becomes a survival strategy. It avoids confrontation, earns temporary approval, and creates the comforting illusion of being needed. Yet every unnecessary yes quietly becomes a no to something else: time with family, personal health, meaningful work, or simply a moment of rest. Clinical psychologist Henry Cloud, who has written extensively about boundaries, argues that healthy limits are not walls that keep people out. They're structures that define responsibility. That idea resonates deeply after 40. A respectful no is no longer viewed as selfish. It's recognized as honest. Ironically, people often trust a man more once they know his agreement actually means something. When every request receives the same automatic acceptance, his word loses value. But when he chooses carefully, his commitments carry weight. And that's the paradox. The less he feels compelled to please everyone, the more others begin to respect both his time and his presence. But perhaps the most profound change has nothing to do with other people at all. It begins inside his own mind, where one habit quietly undermines confidence more than almost anything else. The sixth thing he stops tolerating is his own negative self-talk. For years, the harshest voice in his life may not have come from a boss, a partner, or a critic. It came from the mirror. Every mistake became proof that he wasn't good enough. Every setback became evidence that his best years were behind him. Without realizing it, he repeated the same quiet story until it felt like the truth. Cognitive psychology has long shown that the narratives we repeat shape how we interpret the world. The brain naturally looks for evidence that confirms existing beliefs, a tendency known as confirmation bias. If a man constantly tells himself he's failing, he'll notice every failure and overlook every sign of growth. After 40, many men begin rewriting that story, not with empty affirmations or forced optimism, but with accuracy. Instead of saying, "I've failed too many times," they ask, "What did those failures teach me that success never could?" That subtle shift doesn't erase hardship, it restores perspective. And perspective is often the foundation of quiet confidence. The seventh and final thing he stops tolerating is living on autopilot. The years begin to feel different after 40. Time no longer seems endless. Birthdays arrive faster. Parents grow older. Children become adults. Friends retire or disappear. Mortality stops being an abstract idea and becomes a silent companion. Developmental psychologist Erik Erikson described this stage of life as a choice between stagnation and generativity, between drifting through familiar routines or investing in a life that leaves something meaningful behind. The men who earn lasting respect rarely have perfect lives. They simply become intentional. They choose their relationships with care. They guard their time. They speak with purpose. And they refuse to spend the years they have left waiting for permission to become the man they already know they can be. The final realization brings all 7 lessons together, and it's far simpler than most people expect. Respect rarely arrives in a dramatic moment. It grows quietly, one decision at a time. Every boundary you enforce, every unhealthy pattern you leave behind, every honest no, every intentional choice sends the same message, not just to the people around you, but to yourself. By the time many men reach 40, they realize that respect isn't something you chase. It's something you cultivate through the standards you refuse to compromise. The 7 things we've explored aren't about becoming colder, harder, or less compassionate. They're about becoming more authentic. Because genuine strength isn't measured by how much you're willing to endure. It's measured by knowing what no longer deserves a place in your life. And perhaps that's the greatest advantage of getting older. You stop trying to impress everyone and start becoming someone you genuinely respect. If this perspective gave you something to think about, consider subscribing and joining us for more documentary-style explorations into psychology, relationships, and the quiet lessons that shape a meaningful life. Until next time, thank you for watching.